Rain lashed down, cold and unforgiving. Snow White clutched the huntsman's cloak, her small body shivering against the elements. Behind them, the wolves howled, echoing the queen's fury. They were close, too close. The huntsman urged his horse onward, his face grim beneath his hood. "We must reach the old temple before nightfall," he growled, his voice roughened by the wind. Snow White, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion, merely nodded, burying her face deeper into his cloak. The scent of leather and wood smoke clung to him, a strange comfort in this terrifying wilderness. The Darkwood was a place of twisted trees and hidden dangers, a place where even the bravest souls feared to tread. But the huntsman moved through it with a grim familiarity, a warrior at home in the embrace of shadows. They reached the temple just as the last rays of light faded from the sky. The ancient stones were slick with rain, the entrance guarded by moss-covered statues of forgotten gods. The huntsman lifted Snow White from the horse, his touch surprisingly gentle. "We will be safe here for a time," he said, leading her into the darkness of the temple. Snow White, despite her fear, felt a flicker of gratitude towards this gruff protector. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had defied the queen's command, risking his own life for hers. As she huddled beside a flickering fire, watching the play of shadows on his face, she couldn't help but wonder at the man who had become her unlikely savior. Days turned into weeks, the temple becoming their sanctuary. The huntsman taught Snow White how to hunt, how to fight, how to survive in the unforgiving wilderness. He spoke little of his past, but she gleaned fragments: a war, a lost love, a betrayal that had driven him to the queen's service. She saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of his past etched into the lines on his face. Yet, beneath the gruff exterior, she sensed a deep well of compassion, a flicker of something akin to hope that her presence seemed to rekindle. One night as they sat by the fire, Snow White asked him about the queen. "Why does she hate me so?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The huntsman looked into the flames, his face shadowed and unreadable. "She fears you," he said finally, his voice low and rumbling. "She sees your beauty, your kindness, as a threat to her power." Snow White shivered, drawing her cloak closer. "But I want no part in her games of power," she said, her voice filled with despair. The huntsman looked at her then, and for a fleeting moment she saw something akin to tenderness in his eyes. "Sometimes," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "we do not choose our battles. They choose us." The queen's magic reached out even to their isolated sanctuary. Dreams plagued Snow White's sleep, visions of the queen's rage, of the kingdom crumbling under her iron rule. The huntsman grew increasingly agitated, his nightmares filled with the clang of steel and the screams of the fallen. The air crackled with a palpable tension. One morning Snow White awoke to find the huntsman gone. Panic welled up inside her, choking her. She found him on the edge of the forest, staring towards the distant castle, his face etched with a terrible resolve. "I cannot hide forever," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "The queen will stop at nothing to destroy you. I must face her, end this once and for all." Snow White, fear warring with a newfound determination, stepped forward. "I will not let you face her alone," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The huntsman turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. "You are not ready," he said, his voice gruff with concern. "She wields a power you cannot comprehend." But Snow White stood her ground. "And you wield a courage I could never have imagined," she said, meeting his gaze with a newfound strength. "We face this darkness together or not at all." They confronted the queen in the heart of her fortress, a place of obsidian and shadow. The queen, clad in midnight black, her beauty as cold and sharp as a blade, laughed at their defiance. "Foolish mortals," she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can defeat me? I am power incarnate." The huntsman drew his sword, his face a mask of grim determination. "Your reign of terror ends tonight," he growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. And then the battle was joined. The huntsman fought with the fury of a cornered wolf, his every blow fueled by years of pent-up rage and anguish. But the queen's magic was a living thing, a dark tide that threatened to overwhelm them. Just as despair began to take hold, Snow White stepped forward. She had found within herself a different kind of power, not the queen's cold magic, but a power born of compassion, of love for the people the queen had terrorized. She raised her hands and a blinding light filled the chamber. The queen screamed, a sound of pure rage and agony. When the light faded, the queen lay defeated, her magic broken. But the victory came at a cost. The huntsman, mortally wounded, collapsed beside her.